American troops have begun pulling back in northern Syria under an order from the White House. This video shows American forces leaving a position along Turkey's border. They are doing so to clear the way for an expected Turkish incursion. The planned invasion is targeted at Kurdish fighters there, key American allies in the fight against ISIS. The abrupt policy shift comes after a phone call last night between President Trump and Turkish President Erdogan. Mr. Trump defended the move on Twitter this morning, saying the Kurds were, quote, paid massive amounts of money to fight alongside the U.S., and it's now up to them to figure out the situation. But one of the president's most loyal allies, Senator Lindsey Graham, ripped the decision on Twitter. He said abandoning the Kurds is dangerous and the move is a disaster in the making. CBS News national security correspondent David Martin is at the Pentagon and joins me now. Hi, David. Is there any specific reason the White House decided to do this now?
Well, it clearly happened as a result of this phone call between Turkey's President Erdogan and President Trump. Why the phone call happened to take place on Sunday is not clear, except that the two leaders were supposed to meet at the UN General Assembly when all the world leaders gathered there in September. They were unable to get together then, so this may have simply been a phone call that was following through on the inability to arrange a face-to-face meeting. The way government officials described the phone call, it started out on other issues, and the U.S. has a lot of issues with Turkey, the main one being that Turkey is buying an air defense system from Russia, which the U.S. is not going to allow to be in the same country as F-35s, which it is selling to Turkey, so it has canceled the sale of F-35. So there are lots of issues with Turkey, but apparently at one point the Turkish president brought up his determination to mount an incursion into northern Syria to go after what he believes are Kurdish terrorists who are plotting attacks against his country.
So, David, I just hate to interrupt, but I want to ask you, this is a pretty big concession on the part of the U.S. to Turkey. So did the U.S. get anything out of it?
Well, look, the U.S. has been trying to talk Turkey out of this for months, and it's been trying to arrange joint patrols which would convince the Turks that there was not a threat from northern Syria, and the Turks just haven't been satisfied. And the U.S. has always said it is not going to get itself and put its troops in between a NATO ally and these Kurdish forces that they've been supporting in the war against ISIS. So it's always been clear that if Turkey went through with this, the U.S. was going to have to pull back. Now, the question is, are they just pulling back from the border, or are they pulling out of Syria? If you read the president's tweet, it sounds like this is the beginning of a final pullout, because he said it's time to end these never-ending wars and bring our troops home. But so far, all that has happened is a couple dozen U.S. troops, that's all, just a couple dozen, have been withdrawn from two border posts along the Turkish-Syrian border.
Right. All right. So, David, President Trump on Twitter seemed to downplay our relationship with the Kurds, who, of course, have been our allies in fighting ISIS, but whom the Turks regard as terrorists. Could abandoning our allies in this situation have any consequences for the White House in other situations?
Well, sure. This is your reliability as an ally. The U.S. has been supporting the Syrian Democratic Forces in their fight against ISIS for 3+ years, and the Syrian Democratic Forces have lost a lot of troops fighting ISIS on our behalf, and to suddenly pull the plug and say we're out of here and you're going to have to make your own peace with the Turks is, I think, in anybody's estimation, leaving an ally in the lurch. And that's just got to have consequences when other allies around the world try to determine whether they can rely on the United States.
And what can we expect is going to happen here? Is Turkey saying that they're going to cross the border into Syria? And how does Assad feel about that, number one? And number two, is their goal the extermination of the Kurds?
Well, in the first place, Turkey has been threatening to do this for literally months. And I can't tell you the number of times I've come into this building in the morning and people have told me that it looks like the Turks are getting ready to go. In the past week, they've been making more preparations, and the estimate is that they could, if they wanted, go within 24 to 48 hours. But I think the Turks were counting on some American support, because the Turks do not have the capability to sustain combat operations inside Syria at a very great depth or for very long. And if the U.S. is really going to take a hands-off approach here, Turkey may have some second thoughts about whether to go in there. It says it wants to go in for two reasons. One is to go after terrorists that are threatening the Turkish homeland, and two is to clear out a safe zone so that the by now millions of refugees who have crossed the border from Syria into Turkey can be sent back into Syria. That's just an undertaking of almost unimaginable proportions, but that's what they say.
All right. Well, David Martin at the Pentagon, we thank you so much for your insight.
Sure thing.